Hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar today, sharing only perfect and complete product data. That is what we're going to talk about today. Generating product information for a new product or revising information of an existing one can be an exhausting task. The challenge becomes even bigger when you serve multiple markets, customers, marketplaces, and even maybe an e-commerce website. Often responsibilities and information are shattered across the organization without a clear view of what's where. That's why we have created today's webinar, in which we will cover some proven methods how to easily validate, approve, and share your product data with the world. Today, we will take you on a journey throughout the best practices to define roles and responsibilities for generating and managing product information and how to process these in a workflow. How to use your custom data model, how to use market standards so that the information in your PIM fulfills both the internal and external requirements, and how to share your product information via standard interfaces such as GS1 or ATEM, as well as through custom interfaces such as API, Excel, or XML. After this webinar, we hope you have some great takeaways how to share only perfect and complete product data. Now, before we get started, let's introduce ourselves quickly. My name is Pieter Verhooyen. My role within SRC is that of Marketing Manager. In my role, I talk to the customers SRC has helped, of which you can find results in some interesting customer cases on our website, and our own team of data and solution experts I talk to regularly as well. I also manage the blogs on src.eu, where you can find some useful tips to get the maximum use out of your PIM system. And if you haven't already, you can also follow our updates on LinkedIn or via our newsletter. Joining me today is my colleague Patrick Koester. Patrick, could you introduce yourself shortly, please?
Yes, of course. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patrick Koester. I'm a senior PIM consultant and product manager at SRC. 48 years old, living in White-Ness, and I help businesses to optimize their data management process, solve corporate data quality issues, and facilitate organizations to achieve product data excellence.
Great, thanks, Patrick. Now, what brings the agenda for today's webinar? I just started with a short introduction. And after this introduction, I will talk about the internal and external challenges that organizations are facing today in trying to achieve excellent product data. After this, Patrick will take us through a number of proven methods and ways to actually do this. More specifically, we will discuss validation and workflow functionality. At the end, we have room for a Q&A. Now, you can ask your questions throughout the webinar, but we will address them at the end. So how do you ask questions? In the GoToWebinar panel, you will see a questions box where you can type them in. I will moderate the questions in the background during Patrick's presentation, and I will ask them at the end of the webinar. Don't hold back any questions you might have. We love answering them. And if you wouldn't have enough time to answer them all today during our limited time, we will, of course, answer them via email personally. Now, let's go ahead and dive into the challenges in achieving product data excellence. Let's imagine this factory or warehouse or production facility is your company. Either you're producing a product or you are distributing it. Either way, the market demands product information from you. One example thereof are the data pools you are required to publish to, such as GS1, ATEM, PSN Food Service, and so on. Different channels also require different information. So how do you cope with that? Secondly, languages and markets. Are you publishing your information to multiple countries? Is your product information available and correct in the different languages you are publishing in? And do you also take into account local differences, such as, for example, the metric system versus imperial? Thirdly, jurisdiction and laws. Every market has different laws and rules before a product can enter the market. Does your product comply with the local laws, but also, for example, European ones? Those are just some of the difficulties you will be facing when providing product information to the market. And then your product is on the market, but nobody's buying. Why is that? Let's have a look at some of the challenges when providing customers with the right information. Marketplaces. Every marketplace demands their product information served in a different manner. Syndication tools can help you a long way getting your product right on every marketplace. That's why we have teamed up with Channel Engine to get that right. Google. If your product information, your product description is not correct, it's not going to come up on Google on the first page. It's going to be on page 21. And nobody's buying your product from page 21, unfortunately. Thirdly, high demands by customers. Is all the information you have provided on the product label or the packaging correct? Do your customers understand what they're buying? Extensive explanations on how to use a product are necessary nowadays. The customer is ever more demanding before making a buying decision. And lastly, for example, if you're in the food market, quality labels. Is your product fair trade, vegan? Is it responsibly fished? And so on. The customer needs to know everything. So let's do a quick recap on the requirements that are asked of you. So when you now know who your customer is, where they are, and what they require, and what your market is, you can start with your thought process on how to meet the requirements. What system is suited to tackle all these challenges? And can one tool provide you with all the functionality you need? Is the answer an ERP system, a CMS, a PIM system, something else? How will you structure the information enrichment process? What will be the roles and responsibilities of everyone involved? And which tools will you use to your advantage? Data models, validation rules, workflow functionality? And lastly, how will you get your validated product information to the market? Will you get your data right through trial and error, or will you get it first time right? We believe the answer to all of these questions is a PIM system. In the following presentation by Patrick will show you how to use tools such as workflow and validation to your advantage. So you can be assured that when you send your product information from SRC PIM to your target audience, it is first time right. There will be no back and forth with faulty information, which only costs a lot of human effort, time, and money, but your product information will be internally validated in your PIM system. Now, let's talk about the philosophy behind SRC PIM. Our goal is to help you achieve and maintain product data excellence. How do we do that? By focusing on sharing correct product information throughout the chain, SRC connects stakeholders. And by meeting the demands of your customers and the industry, an easier flow of data through the value chain is possible. We combine the best of both worlds, as is shown in the picture below. With SRC PIM, you can tackle every step in the chain, from accepting product information from the market or from your own internal systems, to gather them together in your PIM, process, enrich, and share it all in one system, and share that product information with the market if you have to. In order to do so, we offer an SRC PIM software platform in which you have a core PIM functionality, where you can store your product information as your one single source of truth in the organization. By expanding the core functionality with our add-on modules, you can simplify your product information processes. You can make sure your information only reaches the market when it's correct and validated against standards. That's what our validation engine does. And to make sure your product data is ready for the market, you will need to gather the necessary data and, where possible, enrich it. Because the information can be scattered because the information can be scattered both inside and outside the organization, we have developed a tool which can help you with this. It's called Workflow. Patrick will tell you all about Workflow in a minute, but I'm curious to know if you're already using Workflow to manage your product information at the moment. Now, I'm going to start a poll because I would like to know your answer. It's an easy yes or no question. Are you already using Workflow to manage your product information? I'll give you all some time to answer. I see the votes coming in. I'll give you some last seconds. Yes, the majority has voted. The results are in, and I'm going to share them on the screen with you. So, are you already using Workflow to manage your product information? 38% says yes. I think that's already quite a fair number. And 62% say no. Patrick, are you surprised by the results?
Yes and no. So actually not really, because defining the appropriate workflow can be quite challenging. But it's good to see that some of you are already using the workflow to make sure that the product data is as complete and valid as possible.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Then we go over to your presentation, Patrick. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Okay, so sharing only perfect and complete product data is divided into these steps. So the Mpe or revised workflow, the validation of the product data, the approval of the product data, and finally sharing the product data. So now let's zoom into those parts. The Mpe workflow within SRC PIM is set up within a certain kind of work area. So we got a Mpe workflow, and in this example, I've divided this into 3 teams: R&D, buying, and marketing. And the workflow is automatically triggered when a new item is created. Each team has its own work area and can only customize or edit its own fields. Once an item has been created and your team needs to do something, you will receive an email notification that there is work to be done. And only when all teams are ready, the product becomes available for the follow-up processing and distribution. Next to the Mpe or new product introduction workflow, it's also possible to implement a revised workflow within SRC PIM. This means that an item can only be modified once the revised workflow is activated. That means that if the workflow is not activated, the item is completely read-only within the application. And the revised workflow can be configured per target system. So you can have a revised workflow for instance, GS1, or your web shop, or another data pool. Also, each team has its own work area and can only customize or edit its own fields. You also will receive an email notification once there's work to be done. And only when all teams are ready, the product becomes available for the follow-up processes and distribution. It's possible to combine them within one catalog within our application. The workflow can be set up in series, parallel, or it can be a combination of both. Once in series, that means that one team needs to kick off, and when they have finished all their tasks, the next team can go on with their tasks. Parallel means that everyone can work independently. Notifications can be sent immediately or on scheduled times. It's also possible to use custom fields for validations, for instance, because you have a own web shop. And the item is suppressed for the follow-up processing and distribution when the item is still present in a workflow. So the system keeps that in control for you. One other important thing is to validate the product data. The use of validations prevents sharing incomplete product data with third parties. As I already mentioned, custom validations can be set up, but they can be set up per workflow step or per team. So each team can have their own set of validations. And it's possible to create product group specific validations. So validation is only mandatory for a certain product group. And the same goes for the target system. Within SRC PIM, we got different validation states. We got warning, incomplete, and complete. Warning means something still needs attention, but it doesn't suppress the item for distribution. Incomplete, something does need attention, and the item will be suppressed before it is shared with other systems. And the final one is complete, and only complete items can be shared or synchronized with third parties, and SRC PIM monitors this for you. Optionally, we can also create a validation report. This can be done manually by user within the GUI, but we can also schedule them on specific times. After all the product data has been validated, we have the final step, the approval. Approving the item is accepting or rejecting the item within SRC PIM. In this case, also you get a notification if something needs to be approved. Accepting the item will start the next step in the process, and rejecting the item will set it back one step or a specific step within the workflow. If desired, the accept or reject can be configured in combination with the mandatory comment. And multiple approval moments are possible within the workflow. So you can have an approval per team, and then at the end, a final approval before distribution. Accepting multiple items at once is also possible, and only approved items can be shared or synchronized, and SRC PIM monitors this for you. After all the checks and enrichment has been done, it's time to share the product data. Within SRC PIM, that's done by the Synchronized functionality, and SRC PIM keeps track of which product data has been changed via the synchronization status. So an item can be published, new, or changed. By default, only new and changed products are synchronized. This way, you can make sure and prevent a certain load regarding the target systems. As already mentioned, interfaces with multiple target systems is possible, and the synchronization status is recorded for each target system. And one other thing, synchronization to a target system can also be performed automatically via a scheduled task. And even though we don't advise it, it's also always possible to synchronize the complete range. Well, regarding the synchronization, there are some interfaces available within SRC PIM. So these are the default interfaces. So we have a connection with the 2BA data pool for eTIM GS1. You can publish via Magento to your website. We also have a connection with PC and Food Service. And as my colleague already mentioned, for syndication, we use Channel Engine. If the above interfaces are not sufficient, it's also possible to use our standard formats, like SRC PIM XML format or our SRC PIM Excel format. Our SRC PIM also has a web API, which can be used to retrieve or enrich product data. And if all those things are not sufficient, it's also always possible to create a custom interface. So for my contribution, back to Peter.
Yes. Can everybody hear me? I hope so. Thanks for your presentation, Patrick. It's over to the questions now. We've had some coming in, and don't hesitate if you still have a question. There's still some time left today, so put in your question and I will ask it to Patrick. Patrick, maybe the first question that came in, can I decide per product attribute what is considered incomplete or worth a warning, and can I change that?
Yeah, the custom validations can be maintained by your organization within our application. For instance, you can create a validation group for team A, in which the field or attribute is mandatory, so it will give an incomplete status. But it's also possible to introduce the same validation for another team with a warning. So you're fully in control which validation is necessary for which team on which step within the workflow.
So you can also change that when necessary or add extra validations if it's needed.
Yes.
Cool, cool. Another question that came in, I think it's a really good one. What if I have a workflow set up and the final approval is rejected because somebody or some team still has to fill something in, but it's in the beginning of the workflow, so it already went to a ton of people or teams. Do they have to do the whole workflow again, everyone, or only that one person that missed something?
That's depending on how the workflow has been designed. So when we're implementing a workflow in our application, we will sit with you and we will discuss how the workflow must work, which ways, and it means that if it's necessary to go back to the beginning of the workflow, we can set that. It's also possible to introduce a reject per team. So if you reject the work of a certain team, that the item will go back in their workflow, but it doesn't affect the workflow of the other teams.
Great, so it's fully customizable, in fact. Okay, a third question, maybe the last one for today. How can I see, because you talked about synchronization, how can I see what I have synchronized to each target system if I'm publishing to multiple target systems? How do I see what I've published to each one?
Good question. Per target system, let me say it another way. Every target system is a collection within our application. So you can see per collection which items have been synchronized in the past, which items are new for that target system, or which item has been changed since the last publication towards that target system. So every target system has its own collection, and every target system has its own synchronization status.
That's great. That's great. Okay, I think that was the last question that came in for today. If you would have more questions later, or you would think of some questions, or you're curious to know more about how we use validation and workflow in our effort to achieve and maintain product data excellence, please reach out to us. We are curious to know how we can help you. You can contact our sales team. They are eager to help via sales@src.eu or the contact form on our website. For now, I want to thank you for your attention, for being here during this webinar. I want to thank Patrick for the presentation and the answering of the questions. Thank you, Patrick. If you don't already do this, please follow us on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/ you can find us on SRC System Integrators, or visit our website on src.eu for more information. And that's it for today. I wish you a lovely day, and thank you again for being with us today. Thank you, Patrick, too.
Bye.